Step 1, forgive. Oh, you guys, this is a good one. You have got to forgive them, but you also have to forgive yourself. So forgiving other people and forgiving yourself is huge. It is not their fault that you go back on your boundaries. It's yours. They may be pushing your boundaries, and that's their fault, and you can teach them about that. But it's then, so even if it is their fault and they are pushing your boundaries, there's a difference between fault and responsibility. So it may not be your fault, but it has become your responsibility. So your responsibility is to hold your boundaries. Step 2 is to define what your boundaries even are. A lot of times, you don't even know what your boundaries are until somebody stepped on them or pushed them or offended them. So when you get triggered, pay attention and journal that, write that down so you start to learn what are your boundaries. You might say yes when you really want to say no. So if you're an over yeser, if you yes people to death, you're probably people pleasing, and then in order to please other people, you are abandoning yourself. So that is a really good sign that you are lacking in boundaries. That is, you didn't even know that you had that boundary until you saw somebody else acting in a way that was outside of your boundary. So then all you say is, okay, you know what? My personal boundary is, you can just say, no, I've got a boundary around this, right? So that is how you define what your boundaries are, is you kind of pay attention to when those triggers are. Step 3, communicate. How do you communicate a boundary? You know what? Sometimes it's really hard, you guys, because when we're trying to be firm, we sometimes end up being mean. How you want to communicate it is be firm, which means this is a non-negotiable. I'm not backing down, right? But you don't have to be mean about it. But you want to make sure that you're communicating it in love, but that also means love of self, right? So let them know up front is sometimes a good way to do it, is so that you're not hitting somebody by surprise, especially if you've been terrible about protecting your boundaries in the past. It's going to hit them as a shock. So sometimes I like to go to people and say, hey, you know what? I am working on some self-development right now around some boundaries. So it's going to look a little different in our communication. I'm really going to need X, and the communication will look like Y. And you can just let them know, like, hey, and it can be fun. You don't have to be like, whatever, because going back to be firm but not mean, it's just like, hey, babe, like, I'm going to be doing this. Like, I'm super excited to try this out. Will you come along with me, help me with this? Then they're going to be receiving it a lot better. So then when you actually do have to set a boundary, they're already prepared in advance, and they don't feel like you just hit them across the face with it. You think that if I'm being assertive and holding to my boundaries, then I'm being rude, mean, selfish, right? You've got to get that lie out of your head. That is not true. So this is an act of self-care. It is not selfish. Boundaries is self-care and others care because you're able to care for them a little bit better. So the next one, setting consequences. So now you've communicated them. You've said, hey, my boundary is this. This is what this is going to look like in advance. Now you have to set consequences. So a boundary is kind of an if statement, and then the consequences are the then statement. So if this happens, then this is what's going to happen. Loved ones stop over unannounced. That bothers a lot of people, right? So you can say, hey, I love seeing you. Next time I would really appreciate it if you would call first, right? So there's the boundary request ask. And if you don't do that, there's the then statement, the consequence statement. I may not be able to see you. So it still feels loving, right? Like, hey, I'd love to see you. Would really appreciate it if you called first. Otherwise, I might not be able to see you, right? So you're kind of setting the consequence in advance. Next step is, I think step number, what am I on? 5, practice. So this is where you put that in action. You have to hold to it, you guys. So it's going to feel awkward at first, but it is necessary. So start small. So say you have an issue with saying no. Say no on little things that don't matter. Say no even when you can say yes and when it doesn't really have any impact, just so you can get practice with it. Would you like some water? No. So when somebody asks you what you want, practice actually saying it. And then, you guys, the number one thing is then you have to hold to it, okay? So boundaries mean nothing if you don't actually follow through. So you have to say, if your no is no and your yes is yes, that is holding to your boundaries, and it's going to feel a lot better. Last one, maintenance. It's just you're going through the steps all over again. And you're learning yourself, you're learning the people around you, and you're making changes and being dynamic. That is what you're supposed to do. So don't hold on to the old stuff, because here's what's fascinating. When you hold on to the old stuff and you are not honoring the new you, then what happens is you're not honoring the new boundary that you just set. So you're actually holding on to the old stuff is you not practicing boundaries. Okay.